This is not a speed hack, nor did I make any illicit changes to tamper with any of the game's files. What you are seeing can all be done within the game by anyone on any decent computer, and this video will show you how. So how does it work? You may have noticed that many of the maps contain certain spots that they don't really want you to access. Areas that will forcibly push your character off the object so that you can't stand on them. Normally, this is done to prevent you from effectively using any areas deemed too advantageous for characters that can reach them. However, by abusing the momentum generated as the game tries to push us off the object, this mechanic is also exactly what gives us access to the crazy speed boosts we can achieve. Let's call these areas boost spots, just to simplify things. So, mystery solved? Not quite. You're all lined up, exactly as shown in the video, yet no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to reach the same amount of boost. This is because the speed you'll generate is actually completely dictated by your in-game frames per second. At a stable 60 FPS, you will barely notice any speed at all as your dragon leisurely glides along the beam at just slightly below walking speed. Disappointing, frankly. Bumping it up to 144 FPS, you will instantly notice a great difference as you're suddenly outpacing most characters in the game, definitely having the ability to potentially catch someone off guard. We're now at 238 FPS, and things are really getting out of hand. I've suddenly discovered the power of the white powder as I'm nearly teleporting across the beam, now able to cover the distance of any map in mere seconds. But why stop there? 238 seems like such an odd number when 240 Hz monitors and beyond exists. But to quickly break the sad news, we've already reached the cap. Completely uncapping our FPS, our sad dragon now sits at a complete standstill, confused and useless as he contemplates existence. Or something. Point is, going too high causes the speed boost to fully stop working. Furthermore, an important note to consider is that the various boost spots you'll find on different maps may also have different FPS caps, determining at what point the speed boost breaks. Bazaar having one of the highest at 238, meaning that many other boost spots such as this one on Brightmarsh won't actually work. I would therefore recommend that if you're planning to use this tech or exploit, depending on what perspective you have on it, choose somewhere within the 220 to 230 FPS range, as that should cover most of the boost spots available. I will also provide a couple of links in the description explaining how to change the FPS cap, as well as a more in-depth look into optimizations you can do in Paladins, in case you're unsure about these things. Now that you know how to consistently get the boosts, actually utilizing them and learning to control your speed will just take a lot of practice. If you still find yourself struggling with actually keeping the speed, try to mix up the way you're using your passive jetpack ability. Using it too much or too little can cause you to lose much of or all of your momentum, so just experiment until you discover the correct rhythm. Another whole section I could go over is the way physics work when hitting an incline after getting the initial boost. This will sometimes keep your momentum perfectly, not even requiring you to use your passive hover to maintain your speed, which means you'll not only be traveling at light speed, but also without making any sound whatsoever. As incredibly overpowered as this sound, actually pulling it off consistently can be a whole different kind of story, as you're not only limited to areas that have an incline conveniently placed near a boost spot, but also need the precise angle and inputs to pull it off too. Moving on, I will now give you an overview on which maps are good for speed boosts and which aren't, as well as point out some highlight locations of each. Here's a tier list showing a general overview of which maps are good and which ones are bad purely in terms of speed boosts available. Amazing tier. I've only put 2 maps in this tier, Brightmarsh and Bazaar, both of which definitely being standouts when it comes to speed boosting. In first place, we find Brightmarsh, already being one of the better Drogoz maps in the game, even without the boosts. Truth to be told, There aren't actually that many places to boost on this map, but the ones available are in amazing spots, being easy to access while granting many safe and beneficial routes to use. The next one is Bazaar, being almost a complete opposite of Brightmarsh, in that it instead is completely littered with useful and very easily accessible boost spots. If you see a spot you think you can boost on in this map, you most likely can. Many of these areas aren't the safest to use due to the fact that Bazaar on its own is a pretty weak map for Drogoz, having a lot of long range angles for hit scan to take you down relatively easily. However, the sheer amount of these boost spots keeps Bazaar firmly planted in the amazing tier. A huge benefit that both of these maps have in common is that you're able to fly above most of the structures without being bothered by invisible walls, something that isn't a given with some of the maps later on. Good tier. All of the maps you'll find here can feel just as good as the top two, and I wouldn't be surprised if you'd end up favoring any of them over either of the previous ones listed. Starting off with Serpent Beach, this map offers one very useful spot in particular, being this ledge encompassing the whole lakeside of the point. You also have this part of the ruins which leads straight across the point, and finally, these small ledges. At first sight, these might not seem very useful as they're quite out of reach, needing you to sacrifice a lot of booster fuel and your thrust to land on them in the first place. But they very conveniently lead right into an incline, giving you a reliable setup for the incline trick mentioned earlier. Ascension Peak has what I'd call somewhat of a highway of speed boosts as you go along each rooftop on the lakeside of this map, stretching across the entire length of the map. As fun as this is to use, chaining multiple rooftops together to stay mobile, if the enemies have a capable sniper, you will have a rough time on this map. An honorable mention also goes to this rooftop on the complete opposite side of the map. Another easy and convenient spot that leads straight into an incline for the trick previously mentioned. Splitstone Quarry suffers from a lot of the similar issues as Ascension, as it'll give you a lot of trouble if your enemies have 2 or more capable hit-scan champions. The boost spots are still nothing to scoff at, as long as you can be creative with your escape routes, having both easily accessible options as well as these huge centered rooftop ones on either side. Stonekeep has some amazing spots, but they all suffer from being quite difficult to reach or tricky to use, the main ones being the rooftops located on the main choke points of each side. A couple more obscure areas is this invisible hitbox at the first turn after capturing, the small lights scattered around the map, and the head of this statue located right after exiting your spawn. In Dawnforge, you can actually already make use of the boost pads around the map to keep momentum and go quite fast. But on top of that, you also have all of these beams lining the top of the map functioning as viable boost spots. The things that hold this map back from being amazing for it is that it's quite a clunky map to go fast on, as half of the map basically takes place in tight corridors. Secondly, the beams themselves are in quite hard to reach locations, and some of the ones you can boost on have quite funky hitboxes, making it easy to mess up. Now at first sight, Jaguar Falls might seem like one of the very best maps, as it's already just a good Drogoz map. I mean, just look at these ledges, appearing very similar to the very useful ones you find in Serpent Beach, but even easier to access. Unfortunately, they aren't quite what they make out to be, as they're overall quite janky and seems to depend on which direction you're trying to go. To add to this, you don't really have many other reliable options to your disposal here. Therefore, I'd say it's about on par with the previous 5 and the last one in the good category, lacking tier. The first map I'll mention here is Warder's Gate. This map is a bit of an outlier, as it's not quite as good as any of the previous ones, having only really one area where you can reliably boost yourself. This one area, however, has so many different ways to utilize it, both being a great spot to hover around when defending or pushing here, as well as launching yourself into the center of the map, once again making use of the incline trick. I'd therefore say that out of the 3 maps I'll mention in this tier, this one is definitely the better one. Next up, Fish Market, the first map out of the bunch where I wouldn't really recommend using Drogoz, being quite a bad map for him overall, and only really having this one row of rooftops here to boost from. There's a few cool routes you can make use of from here, but it's quite clunky to reach and overall just quite lacking. And here's a weird one, Frozen Guard. The reason I say it's weird is because it's actually a lopsided map, only having this one really easily accessible boost on one of the sides, whereas if you try it on the other side, you'll notice you can just stand here without gliding. Other than that, this map suffers from a lot of similar issues as Fish Market, just being quite a bad Drogoz map with not enough good spots to make up for it. Another important note is that the ledges here near the spawn has a lower FPS cap, requiring you to be below what most other maps require unless you want to be at a standstill. Terrible tier. You might be surprised that I've put ice mines here, overall one of the best blaster maps. Sadly, this one doesn't have any boost spots at all from what I've found, so even though I can still recommend Drogoz here, it's not for the boost shenanigans you can do in any of the previous ones. But as for the rest of these maps, just avoid Drogoz here. Not only are they bad maps for him, apart from maybe Frog Isle if you're confident you can deal with any potential hit scan plaguing you, but they also offer next to nothing as far as boost spots go. That should wrap up this entire section. Do let me know your experiences, and feel free to share your own boost spots and tips if you figure anything out. But this all leads me into the very last question. Should you do this? It's no secret that this is not an intended feature of the game and might not even be possible by the time you're watching this video. There has been cases of people who make use of this and have gotten their accounts banned, but in those cases there has seemingly always been other exploits at play as well. And with no clear answer from the devs, it's impossible to pinpoint whether or not you'd be at risk for using this. Therefore, I can't recommend you to do it on any accounts you value, and it's a good time for me to remind you that you're doing this on your own risk. This video is mainly to explain and ensure people are at a similar understanding, rather than gatekeep information surrounding how this unintended feature is performed. If you do decide to use it, perhaps consider keeping it to casual queues and be prepared to receive a lot of less nice comments and accusations, especially from those on the receiving end. Lastly, I want to mention that I did get permission to upload a tutorial on this, and that I wouldn't get into any trouble for making this video.
My lawyers tell me to sing.
But with all that said, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new and happy speed boosting.